Hi, and welcome to this presentation of our test tool. My name is Frøydis Hamre, and I've been a product owner in itslearning for the past 7 years. Before that, I worked as a teacher in high school here in Bergen, teaching maths, science, and chemistry, and I was actually using itslearning as a tool every day. I am going to start this with some general information about how we are working with the new tool and how to do, and then do a live demonstration of the current status. Then I'll take a look at some of the things that we are working on at the moment, and maybe mention a few words about the transition that we are planning. I'm not sure there's a lot of time for Q&A, but if you do have questions, please put them in the question box and we'll see what we can manage towards the end. If we run out of time, we'll provide you with answers via email. Now, if I'd done this live in a room with all of us present, I would have started with a show of hands and asking you who has used the old tool or who's used the new tool, and then probably realized that most of you won't actually know the answer to that question. Until recently, it has been very hard to tell which is which unless you know exactly what to look for. To a teacher, this is just a test tool. We have customers who have never seen the new tool until last week. We have customers who actually never saw the old tool and were set up with the new one right from the start. We also have customers who have had both tools enabled for some time or who completely switched from old to new sometime last year. So there's a great variety out there. Now, you can identify the new tool like this. The description text of it when you add a new test starts with allows you to. And when you open a test, the new tool has a sidebar to the right for options, which is familiar from the assignment tool. And right from the start here, I want to say that this is not a superficial redesign or a kind of a surface upgrade of the old tool. We have built a new one completely from scratch. And one of the reasons for that was to allow you to make tests shareable in our library. And this requires a completely different technical approach than how the old tool was built. This means that we are rebuilding all the features, and that also allows us to think through what we want to achieve instead of just copying whatever someone developed in 2005, 2006. We also wanted to make sure that the test can be taken on any device, and as smartphones didn't exist when the previous version was made, making it pretty isn't going to cut it. Making it pretty sounds a bit superficial, but design is very important. When you work with a big platform like itslearning, you know that not all bits and pieces are built at the same time. Whenever we make changes, we try to make sure those changes contribute to a more consistent experience and a more easy experience for our teachers and students. Things should look the same and work the same, even if they are in different places. Our way of working has also changed a lot since we developed the previous version. We have a much stronger focus on user needs, and we spend a lot of time talking to teachers and students and testing prototypes before we do the actual implementation. We also have new legal regulations related to web accessibility that guides us towards a tool that's suitable not just for some, but for all. A test tool is a complex thing, and finding the right compromise between a tool that's easy to use and understand and at the same time flexible enough to allow for many different scenarios is a big challenge. In particular, the market of higher education, there is a need for more options on test security, complex scoring rules, quality control, and documentation of answers and results. I'll now give you a tour through how the tool works today. This is how the new test tool currently works for teachers and students. So I'll just switch, here. So I'm logged in as a teacher, and I have a test that I created previously. And I'll start with some of the options in the sidebar that I mentioned, which is the same one you can find in assignment. And you'll recognize most of the options here with visibility, deadline settings, and so on. You'll also see that this assign to feature, which is fairly new, is also available in the new tool. You can set assessments, number of attempts, and so on. This is all fairly standard. We have a test security section here, where we now added password protection that was made available only this week actually. And we also have test mode browser, which is available if you have that add-on to itslearning. This is a third-party feature using a separate browser to lock down the student computer when they're doing a test. Functionality here, again, exactly the same as you have had in the old test tool previously. And the reason for going into these options is I wanted to show you this section here with the result and feedback. In the old tool, one of the feedbacks that we got from a lot of teachers was that they were not allowed to let the students see the results without also showing them the questions and answers. And that was a problem in particular. I mean, for a teacher, creating a good test is a lot of work, and you want to reuse that to save you time in the future. The assessment process is super quick on a digital test, but creating them often takes a lot of time. So we've split this to allow you to make the result visible, separate from the actual questions and the student answers. So you can allow the students to see their score after each attempt, for instance, and then just after they finished all of them, they can actually see the questions and what they responded. And separately, you can also allow them to see which answer is the correct one. So this means that if you have a practice test, they can go through it several times and for each time see their score, but not really seeing the entire test until they completed all of them or until you allow them to. So if we look at the middle piece here, you have set up the test, you give the test a title just as usual, and you can set an introduction if you want to. You have an option to review the test, which means you go through the test just as a student would, just to make sure that everything looks right, you haven't messed up any of the alternatives, and so on. Or you can ask a colleague, if they're a teacher in your course, to also go in and go through this just to make sure that you pick up on any silly mistakes that you've made. If you have the test mode browser enabled, you can also review the test using the test mode browser, making sure that works as expected. You have an option of categories, and categories is kind of an advanced feature for most teachers. It can be used to divide questions into groups based on difficulty, based on topic, or something else. And then you can set it up to randomly draw just a subset of those questions every time a student starts a test. So this is a great way of building bigger tests where students don't see the same questions, that you can randomize the questions and make sure that, again, you're increasing the test security and reducing the risk of cheating. As for the questions themselves, if you're used to the old itslearning test tool, you will see that the list of question types here is slightly shorter. We actually combined some. The multiple choice and multiple response are now one question type, and the same with short and open answer. They're also combined into one. You'll also see that hotspot is missing from this list. I'll get briefly back to that later on, but that is in progress. If I go into multiple choice, you can see what I said about combining this with the multiple response, where I can simply check this to allow students to select more than one alternative, and that also allows me to set more than one as the correct answer. You might also have noticed that we recently added the option to randomize alternatives in the old test tool. That's actually been in the new test tool all along. Most of these question types work exactly the same as before, and how you would probably expect them to. I wanted to show you the select from a list question type, because that's one of the areas where we actually did make a small change. Again, based on feedback, the problem here was that, right, in this example, maybe not the best case, but you could have texts where you actually wanted to have the same word blanked in multiple places. And the problem was that we showed just one list of all the words that you blanked, and you couldn't actually use the same word twice. That would kind of break the scoring logic. So what we've done now is that we allow you to create your own list for each of this. Slightly more work for the teacher, but it allows for a lot more flexibility. So I can now have equilateral show up in several lists or just in one list, and might be the correct answer in one or more places. So I can simply add distractors here. Sorry, my typing is bad today. And continue to do so. So this would kind of comprise the list of alternatives in each of the places. I'll just add another one here just to show you how this looks when we answer it. And there's a preview option. So when you're working with a question, you can go back and forth a bit just to check how it looks. And you can see that the drop down here now contains the alternatives that I entered. Right, so that's for the creation of tests. I'll just go back to the question list here. And just like previously, you can set the question navigation, deciding if the students have to go only forward in the questions, if they can navigate back and forth, or if you want to show all questions on one page. Of course, keeping in mind that all on one page also means a lot of scrolling. So you don't want to do that with a lot of questions. And similarly, you can choose if the students are presented with the questions in the order that you have in the test, or if they are randomized. And questions are randomized if you're doing the category thing, where you're picking from categories to present the test. And I want to show you the results in another course, actually, where I have some. So when I'm going to look at the results here, I have a quick summary that just tells me basic things about the test. And I can see if there's somebody taking the test right now, or they have started an attempt and not completed it. And in this case, it's not reviewed, which means there's a manual assessment going on here. So again, listening to the feedback that we get, one of the issues that people saw was that when they were displaying the entire answer, they can't actually score it in the same view. So fix that. And I had some feedback that this view might be a bit narrow, but that also makes it a lot easier to read. If text is too wide, it's really hard for the eyes to track the lines. So there's a balance there between having a lot of text in the same window and making sure that it's fairly easy to read. But I can set the score here. Let's say this is a 4. Oh, sorry. Yeah, there was a bug there. There we go. And I can send that. I can also add a text feedback for that attempt. So telling the student that and that feedback text will be available to the student as well. So now that is then assessed and done. Going back to the results. Sorry about that. There's something else. So this is not production site. So one of the disadvantages of me demonstrating things in another environment is that sometimes things hang. Another thing that we added in this was the ability to export the results data. So once your students have completed the test and everything's assessed, you can export the results as a spreadsheet, which simply gives you one row for each attempt, where you can see the total score and the grade. And you can also see the score given for each of the questions. So you can do your own statistics on that if you need. Right. So that's kind of how the test tool works at the moment. A very quick look at how that is. Oh, there's one thing I forgot actually to show you. Let me just go back. Maybe not the best one here. I'll go back to the math one that we saw before. There's also print. So I can print the test to distribute that on paper in case something fails, or I have a student who can't do this on computer due to some issues. Of course, with any natural limitations, videos, not so great on paper. And also for any open answer questions, the area here is fairly limited. So if you have several of those, you might want to just provide an extra piece of paper for that. But it's completely possible to complete this test then on paper in case of any issues with the computer or something. I'm sorry, this is in Norwegian. That was not my intention. But of course, as we're using the browser print functionality, you have the option to store this as a PDF. And then you have an actual print file of your test, or you can send it to a printer to print it out. Yeah, then I'll go back. Right, so the team working on this has been working really hard lately, and we've got lots of great stuff in progress. You might have noticed that the test tool is operating on a separate release schedule. That's become a bit apparent this year, and it's not part of the main itslearning updates. This means that we can release our work faster and more often. It also means that sending out release notes well in advance makes no sense, as we often don't know exactly what's in the release until a few days before. We release when the work is done and not by date. Our next feature release for the test tool will be within the next 2 weeks or so, and I'll show you some of the improvements included there, and then a few other things that are in progress, but kind of bigger work that takes a bit more time. So, as you might know, after someone has started answering your test, it's pretty much locked for edits. This is, first of all, to make sure that no data is corrupted, and second, to make sure that all students take the test under the same conditions. However, as several people have pointed out to me, teachers make mistakes, and they want to correct those mistakes. We want to find a compromise between allowing changes and not breaking stuff. So some changes are easy to allow, others almost impossible. For now, we are opening the option to edit the score of a question or a category. You're already allowed to change the actual text of the question or the alternatives to correct typos. You'll be able to change the score, as I mentioned, the category of a question or the score of a category. But just a word of warning, if you put questions in category by difficulty, for instance, and later move a question from difficult to easy, this means that students who already submitted an attempt, including that question, will now have a different distribution of difficulty in their questions than other students. So that's just a thing to keep in mind, that when you change the category, if somebody already took your test, you might actually change the distribution of question in your student group as a whole. And it might also be worth noticing that there are some restrictions here related to manual assessment. When you do change the score of a question, if somebody already submitted the test, the results will be recalculated for them, so they comply with your changes. We are already storing answers as a student navigates through the test. But we do know that some teachers are using, for example, the open answer question like a paper-based test where students basically write a small essay instead of just a short paragraph of text. And then, of course, there is the risk that they might lose parts of their work. We recently added some Autosave functionality in assignment to cover cases like that. And we've now done this also in test tool, although we chose a different approach. So what happens here is that when you type in an editor like this as a student, when you stop typing for 2 seconds, we are storing your text, first of all, to the browser cache, which is local on your computer. And second of all, as long as the network is up, we'll also store in itslearning. That means that if something suddenly goes wrong, your computer crashes, your network goes down, whatever, the content in here will be safe. And when you resume the test as a student, that content will reappear in the editor. Again, just noting that this timestamp that you're seeing with the draft saved, this actually doesn't work for teachers when you're doing the reviews. So if you're reviewing the test and expecting this to appear, it won't. That's simply because the storing that we do is connected to a student attempt. There's a kind of a definition in the back end there. So this works for students. And it also works if you have several of these open answer questions displayed on one page, where you'll see this timestamp for each box individually. We already have anonymous assessment or anonymous submission in assignment, where the student name is replaced with a random string of characters. That means that teachers are allowed to do their assessment of the hand-in or submission without seeing the student name. We're now making the same functionality available in the test tool, where we simply just replace that student name. And this also affects the result export. So your export will no longer contain a list of student names for the attempts, but instead this random string, of course, the same as you see in the test tool interface. And students will also be informed if the test is anonymous or not when they click on it. So this work is done, but depends on, we have to change something in this learning main platform as well. So it will be available to you a bit later this year. And then I wanted to mention a couple of bigger features that are in progress that we've been testing with some teachers, testing prototypes and so on, and that we're now currently working to implement. And the first one is related to answer alternatives, in particular for multiple choice. So this is a long story, and I'll give you the short version. We will, of course, offer more options than plain text, which is what you have today. We are currently working to support images, But making an accessible test tool that works with or without seeing the screen clearly, with or without using a mouse or a keyboard, is a big challenge. And this does put some restrictions on how we can solve the needs, in particular when it comes to rich content. I'm sure that the end result will be great for all our users, but it is going to take some time to get there. So hang in there. We know what you need, but it's going to take a bit of time to make sure we cover it in a good way. And then lastly, the hotspot that was missing from the question type list, we're building a select point question type. The name has changed from the old test tool, but the functionality is the same. You upload an image, you mark areas that you want the student to click. Those areas are not displayed to the student. They can only see the blank image, and then they can click it. And of course, no longer depends on Flash or any other plugins. So this is going to work across devices. And even though we changed the name, as I mentioned, the actual functionality stays the same, which means that you will be able to import your old hotspot questions into a select point question type. Although that, again, a bit work in progress, but that's one of the things that we are looking at the moment. So over the past month or so, we've been getting more questions and feedback as more and more customers have had the new tool enabled. Some of you have asked for a delivery list with dates, and unfortunately, I really can't provide that. I have plans and so on, but things take time and they are not always that easy to predict. Usage and user needs change over time, and our focus is on making a great solution for all our teachers. Our goal is that you should be able to do everything that you could in the old tool, maybe with some minor exceptions, and we are prioritizing our work based on usage statistics. So I look at the statistics to figure out which parts are used more, and then prioritize based on that, and of course, user feedback. Some missing features are obviously more important than others. And I'm sure there are many questions about the next step in this process to transition from one tool to another for those that where this is relevant. And in general, the important things to remember is that we are not touching your existing tests. They are going to continue to work just like today for a long time. We'll make sure that you are well informed ahead of time when we start making changes. The first step, which will not happen at least until the end of 2021, is to prevent you from creating new tests from scratch using the old tool. You'll still be able to copy, edit, and reuse your existing tests. And I guarantee that we're not touching your tests as they are until at least the end of the next school year, so next summer. That's the minimum. So that will be the next step, is then probably putting some restrictions on copying old tests or something like that. You can manually export and import your questions, moving them from the old tool to the new one. You can do that right now. And we encourage everyone to get familiar with the new tool. Use it wherever you can, as often as you can. We realize that some of you might be limited because you are depending on some of the options we haven't gotten around to implementing yet. But we'll continue to frequently make big and small additions to the new tool. So make sure you check in often to see if your favorite option is now available. So the old tool is still there, still available for you if that's needed for your exact scenario. So I've got like 1 minute left. Let me just check questions. There we go. So
there's a couple of questions on here.
Yeah.
So we can go through a couple. Can the number of points vary depending on the answers they select?
Great question. No, not yet. But there's a great need for this, in particular when, as I said, there are more scoring needs when it comes to higher education. So we're working on that and trying to figure out the correct logic on how to make that available, in particular for multiple choice and multiple response questions where this is especially relevant.
Okay, next one. Oh, you ready for the next one? Or yeah,
yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Can answers be randomized as well as questions?
Yes, that's one I probably went through way too fast for you to see. Sorry about that. Where in multiple choice, there is a randomize option available.
Okay. Next one. How do you then identify the student for retrieving the right mark to the right student? Can you add a standard number to each student?
No, the random string that we use for anonymizing is just that, it's random, and it's not something you can input. So this is a kind of an ongoing discussions that we're having with a couple of our customers. So I'm aware of the scenario. I haven't got a brilliant solution right now.
Okay. And final question, can you reuse questions from one test to another?
Oh yeah, that's I didn't want to go too much into things that we were working on. I have a fairly big team of developers available to me at the moment working on this. So we're trying to do several things in parallel because obviously there's a limit on how many people can actually work on the same piece of code at the same time. So the thing about importing questions from one test to another is something that we just tested a prototype of. So I'm expecting us to start implementing that during the summer. So that's going to be available later this year.
Okay, I think Great. That is all the questions.
Yeah.
So just to say, this webinar was recorded, so we will send you a recording out in the next few days. And also not to forget that we have another webinar next Thursday on the planner. And when we send out the recordings, we'll include the link to register for that as well.
Yep. Thank you very much and have a great summer, everyone.